Hello, my friend. This is Clyde. Someone's been calling your name. 1 Samuel 3:10 and 11. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. Stop and think for a moment. You are somewhere minding your business. You hear your name. It is not loud, but it is clear. Someone is calling your name. You look around and you don't see anyone. It happens again and again. How would you feel? Scared? Someone is playing a prank on you? Maybe it is your imagination. But there's one thing that is clear. You heard a voice calling your name. There are numerous people in the Bible that God called by name. God is like that. Yes, He's personable. And He calls people by their names for specific reasons. When He called Abraham, for example, it was to make a special promise to him that he would be great and he would be the father of many nations. This was at a time when Abraham was getting old and he had not had children. He called Moses in a dramatic style, caught his attention by causing a bush to be on fire, but it wasn't burning. Strange, right? But he caught Moses' attention, and the conversation that followed between Moses and God changed the course of his life forever and led to the most amazing emancipation of a nation. There are many other persons in the Bible that God called. There was this Jewish girl called Ester who was in exile in a foreign country and gradually moved up to becoming the queen of the empire, albeit a queen without power, but queen nonetheless. But God had a plan, and eventually God set her up to be the one who would save her Jewish people from annihilation. One last person I would like to mention from the Bible is this guy called Saul. Saul was a terrorist, a persecutor, a hater of Christians. Now, if I were to guess, I would never imagine that God would call this guy. He was a thorn in the flesh of Christian people. He was killing and brutalizing and throwing them in jail because they served Jesus. But don't you know that God is like that? He does the extraordinary, the unexpected. God called Saul by name, and eventually God used this man to become a mighty force in God's business. He was a prolific defender of God, ended up working totally for the rest of his life to win people for God. We have a text before us of God calling the name of a young boy. His life was strange. First, his mother could not have any children. She prayed and prayed and prayed. And then a miracle occurred and she gave birth to this baby boy and she called him Samuel. Why? Because I asked the Lord for him. She had made a promise to God before she was even pregnant that if God gave her a child, she would give the child back to God. And so when Samuel was old enough, she brought him to live with the chief prophet in the city, an old man named Eli. Samuel lived a simple life, living in the house of the Lord. Well, one night while the kid was asleep, Samuel is awakened by the sound of someone calling his name. He went to the old man Eli, who assured him, "No, I wasn't calling you. Go back to bed." It happened 3 times. Then Eli got a hunch. He said to Samuel, "The next time you hear this voice calling your name, this is what you should do. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." That's a strange and grown-up instruction to give a child. But sure enough, it happened, and Samuel had his first encounter with God as a child. And God shared with his kids some things that were going to happen in the nation of Israel. That was the beginning of a great life for Samuel. He succeeded Eli as the prophet in the nation, and he was an outstanding man of God. Have you ever heard God calling your name? I mean, literally. God calling you by name. God calls us over and over again. Sometimes he calls your name because he wants to get your attention, to speak to you about changing a particular behavior or lifestyle. Sometimes he calls your name because he has an assignment for you. Sometimes he calls your name because he wants to establish a special relationship with you. God can call your name, and he does, for any reason. But when he does, my friend, do you know that it is God's voice? Do you know that it is God really calling your name? There's no specific description of God's voice, but one thing is clear. God does not play tricks. He does not play games. When he calls your name, that's because he wants you to hear, and he wants you to know beyond any doubt that it is him calling you. Maybe God has called your name and you have ignored it. Maybe in this season, God is calling your name, but you are too busy doing your own thing to stop and acknowledge God calling your name. Maybe you are scared of what you think God might be calling you for. My friend, if God is calling your name, take my advice. Answer. Do not ignore the call. You might ignore it to your peril. Stop and listen to what God wants to say to you. And the last thing I will say is, whatever God tells you to do it, do it.